So basically, there is a massive difference of opinion, and that's putting it politely, between Charles and William about how to deal with these renegade members of the family. But what I do know about Eugenie, from a friend of hers, told me that she's very nervous that she is going to have to completely sever contact with her father, or else she's going to lose her kind of charitable philanthropic career. A friend of Beatrice told me she can't eat, she can't sleep, she is so stressed out. Hello folks, it's Tom Sykes, the Royalist here. I am going to be talking in this film about Beatrice and Eugenie and the fallout from their parents. This is based on an exclusive I did last night for my Substack, which I would please encourage you to subscribe to, certainly as a free subscriber. And if you're feeling really generous, you can go as a paid subscriber and want to support my work. So the exclusive I did last night was based on conversations that I've been having with friends of Beatrice and Eugenie, the two princesses, the two daughters of former Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, and how they are struggling to cope with the fallout from the collapse of their parents' lives. So look, I'm not suggesting that anyone needs to feel sorry for Beatrice and Eugenie, or that anyone shouldn't feel sorry for Beatrice and Eugenie. That's a very personal thing, depending on how much you think that they are victims of their parents' behaviour and how much you think they were complicit in it. My own view is that it's a bit of both, and I think we need to wait and see what emerges. I think if information emerges that, into their late 20s or their mid-late 20s and their 30s, if there is anything showing that they accepted money from Epstein or anything like that, I think they're going to be in big problems. My instinct is to kind of forgive stuff that people did before they're 22 or 23. That's just my personal take. Everyone will have their own idea. But obviously, as you would expect, they are finding it very hard to cope with the fallout of the collapse of their parents' lives, as any person would. A friend of Beatrice, who lives in a sort of fashionable village in the Cotswolds, which is this trendy area of the UK where you've got kind of Soho Farmhouse and Estelle Manor and all these kinds of fancy places, and where a lot of the sort of trendy London rich aristocratic mob have relocated to, told me she can't eat, she can't sleep, she is so stressed out. And I must say, I have noticed that Beatrice doesn't look a brilliant weight, I'll just put it that way. I don't comment on people's appearances generally, as you will know. The friend said that she'd cut off contact with all but a few close friends, wasn't really leaving the house unless she has to, which I believe includes kind of work commitments or the school run or stuff like that. She of course has a young daughter who's a preschooler, Sienna, who we saw out on that ride with Prince Andrew the other day. Again, the friend making very clear that the trip out on the pony in Windsor Great Park, Beatrice, Sienna and Andrew, that happened 2 or 3 days before the latest Epstein dump. That was actually, the photos emerged on January the 27th, and I think the files were dropped on the 30th. That photo will not be repeated. They're both very anxious, I'm told, about what's going to be in Andrew Loney's new paperback edition of his book Entitled, which is going to be published within the next couple of months. Andrew's revealed the cover for that new book, and that Sarah Ferguson, her whereabouts is still something of a mystery. There are rumours all over the shop, that she could be anywhere. The truth is nobody knows. But one thing that's for certain is she will not be moving into a guest cottage that Beatrice has, because, as his friend said to me, the last thing Beatrice wants is the press camped outside her home to get pictures of Sarah. So where are we with these two young women? Well, Beatrice works as a gallerist. She works for a sort of fashionable gallery called Hauser and Wirth. They've actually been over in Qatar, at Art Basel in Qatar in recent days. There were rumours that Beatrice was there. I haven't actually seen anything that would actually confirm that. But yeah, she's trying to get on with it. Her husband, Eduardo Mapelli Mozzi, known as Edo to his friends, is trying to keep going, I'm told, has to keep trying to grow his business, which is called Banda. It's kind of art and architecture and design and development consultancy. He's from a very, very good Italian aristocratic family who were always slightly uneasy about him marrying into the Yorks, because even when they married a few years ago, there were a lot of, there'd already been a lot of stuff about Andrew. So they were always a bit uneasy about it. And as far as I know, he is just trying to keep going. He's trying to obviously be there and support his wife. And, they are a close family. There's no question of any discord between them or anything like that. I don't want to imply that. I'm just saying the family were a little unsure when it was first announced. But yeah, so he's keeping going. There's been a whole lot of art fairs in Palm Beach the last few weeks. There's been a big, I think, frieze fair and a big sort of design thing. They often do all the things at the same time. So that's been going on, and he's been out there, I think, probably quite happy to be away from it all. But it does mean that Beatrice has basically been home alone with the kids. Yeah, I think things are very difficult for Beatrice. To be totally honest, I have better sources with Beatrice, who lives in the UK, than I do with Eugenie. But what I do know about Eugenie, from a friend of hers, told me that she's very nervous that she is going to have to completely sever contact with her father, or else she's going to lose her kind of charitable philanthropic career. Now, Eugenie established a thing called the Anti-Slavery Collective a couple of years ago. It's been quite successful within its field. It's got a good profile. It's obviously a very worthy, a very good and fashionable cause. And of course, being associated with these kind of philanthropic endeavors is a crucial part of building your brand and building your image and letting people know who you are. So a friend said to me, it's the understatement of the year to say it's a very difficult situation. Of course, they feel let down by the new revelations. Eugenie's work with the Anti-Slavery Collective is super important to her, and she feels that she is going to have to make a choice, i.e., she's going to have to make a choice between letting it be known that she is standing by her father, or who's accused of sex trafficking, who seems to have been involved in a sex trafficking ring with Epstein, which is, of course, a form of enslavement. So she has some very difficult choices to make. Now, Charlotte Griffiths, a sort of well-connected journalist who writes for the Mail, reported earlier this year that Eugenie had adopted a Brooklyn Beckham policy of complete estrangement from her father. But other reports that seem to have been briefed by the Yorks have pushed back against that, suggested the situation is less clear-cut, and that Eugenie will simply be avoiding any public appearances with her father. Well, I think we already knew that from what we saw at Christmas, which was, of course, before the latest Epstein files dump, when both Beatrice and Eugenie elected to go to Sandringham and spend Christmas with the King and William and Camilla rather than being with their own parents. This, again, I think did not go down well with William. William doesn't completely trust Eugenie, who's remained close to Harry and Meghan, has visited Harry and Meghan, has expressed visually, not she hasn't come out and said anything, but has visually expressed her support for Harry and Meghan. And I think that obviously unsettles William. William is very much, old school. You've got to choose a side. Are you with me or are you with Harry? If you're with him, forget about it. And I think we saw that in the walk to church, where William just basically avoided any sort of eye contact or talking to Eugenie. It was weirdly reminiscent of how he kind of blanked her father at the Duchess of Kent's funeral. Now, again, this gets to the core of the big argument, the big disagreement between William and Charles that my readers on my Substack, The Royalist, and those of you who watch this YouTube will know that I talk about a lot, and which you won't read about very much in the UK papers because they're scared of upsetting the king and then they get their access withdrawn. So basically, there is a massive difference of opinion, and that's putting it politely, between Charles and William about how to deal with these renegade members of the family, how to deal with Andrew and how to deal with Harry. And that is now extending to how to deal with Andrew's family. So William's very clear. He sees the very obvious reputational impact of having Eugenie and Beatrice still, wandering around, going to church, representing the Outward Bound Trust, doing like royal events, being patrons, walking around with HRHs whilst pursuing private careers. He understands and sees that very, very clearly. Charles still clings to his idea of, this is all about the perfect family. The royal family have to be the perfect family. We have to be the ideal family. We have to stick together. We have to show that we're like any other family that has its problems, but we can come together and get over it. But of course, they're not like any other family, because if there were any other family, dirty Uncle Andrew would be being investigated by the police. And maybe in that circumstance, it would be appropriate to have the daughters, reintegrated within the family if the father had been sent off to jail and you were trying to support them. That, I think, would be different. I think that Charles is making a huge mistake by rushing to embrace the York sisters. I think that whilst his motivation, I'm sure, is very compassionate and very humanitarian, it seems asking for trouble because we don't know yet everything that there is to know about their involvement in Epstein or their father's network. And it certainly seems like Beatrice is very involved in that network. She spends a lot of time in the Middle East, of course, famously gave a sort of tea party, a pay-per-play tea party in the Hilton, in the Riyadh Hilton, which was used as basically as a detention center in MBS's big crackdown on the Saudi Arabian elite. So look, to put it politely, there are question marks, right, over how much they knew. Now, as I was saying, if in 3 years' time it emerges that actually they didn't know anything about it, they've stepped away from obvious connections and involvement with their father and his network, I would say fine. I would say people would be like totally okay with them being invited to Christmas and walking to Sandringham with the rest of the family. But I think it's way too soon now to be saying, as sorry as people might feel for them on an individual human basis, like I get that. There's no reason why there can't be private expressions of sympathy or anything like that. But public statements of solidarity by Charles are foolish, they're weak. I think it was part of the price of the deal that Andrew and Sarah extracted, that the daughters got to keep their royal status. And I think once again, William has the foresight to see that this is really not a smart or intelligent way to go down. It's sort of making yourself a hostage to fortune once again of things that you can't control. So the thing that I think is also very interesting is now what is going to happen to Sarah Ferguson. So there's a report out today saying that she is in talks with a ghostwriter to pen a memoir about her fall from grace. That is a very interesting prospect. Again, it feels to me a bit like a threat, because we now know that she is not going to be provided with a house by the king. At least that's what the statement said when Andrew was defenestrated. It said that she wouldn't be provided with a house or accommodation or a pension. Well, I suppose her question is, well, hang on a second. I have been housed by the royal family for the past 30 years. So what am I supposed to live off now? If I don't have anything to live off, I may have to write a book. So it feels to me a bit like a threat. And I think that it's an empty threat. I don't think that realistically any publisher is going to want to be caught up in the reputational damage of signing Sarah to write a book. But of course, these days there are other options open to people. And I'm sure that Sarah Ferguson has had a look at Substack, had a look at YouTube. We know she had a YouTube channel for a long while. I'm not suggesting that she's about to do these things, but the potential for Sarah to embarrass the royal family is almost unlimited because she has had a ringside seat to the whole thing, to Diana. She was close with Diana, the divorce, Camilla, like everything, every scandal, the whole thing of the last 30 years, she's been there. I mean, the book that she could write would make Harry's book look like the teddy bear's picnic, if you want my opinion. It's an absolutely critical few weeks now for the British royal family. I think that unless decisions are actually made to show a bit more rigour and to deal with Andrew a bit more fairly and to demonstrate that there is neither fear nor favour in the police, I think this could turn out very, very badly for King Charles. It's massively impacting his popularity. We saw him being heckled on a walkabout in Essex earlier this week. And the heckle is kind of completely valid, what the person's asking. Charles, should the police be investigating Andrew? That's what he said before he was led away by the police. Not quite sure that it's a police matter, free expression. But the fact is that, as one former staffer told me, again from an exclusive I did on my Royalist Substack earlier this week, they told me the monarchy has shielded Andrew from any accountability for his actions for decades. That's not about to change. And a friend of the king told me the entire situation with Andrew is a nightmare, but if he ends up in court, it's only going to get worse. He could inflict enormous reputational damage on the institution. And then what friends of William say is they say, cut the Yorks out, kick the Yorks out, kick the girls out, send Andrew off, send the police to talk to Andrew, to investigate him, allow him to be investigated. If he gets sent to jail, so be it. But what friends of the king say is they say, oh, well, it's all very well to say this when you're effectively, when you're not the king. It's like an opposition politician saying, yeah, we'll lower taxes and we'll do free childcare and free school lunches and etc., etc., etc. It's all very easy when you don't actually have to carry the consequences of it. And the reality is that, does Charles think Andrew should face police investigation? Well, I don't know, but he doesn't want him to. He certainly doesn't want him to, or if he did, he would have faced it by now. So it's another weekend of the Yorks continuing to dominate the narrative about the royal family. Of course, all these revelations that are coming out in the Epstein files, just extraordinary, and the detail, the sort of granular detail, I think is so shocking and so upsetting, and of course so triggering for people who've experienced anything like this themselves. And ultimately, they need to get ahead of it and deal with it. So, a couple of other things happening this weekend. We think that the decision on Harry's security, it may, or the RMB bit may already have been done. What Ravek are going to decide probably won't emerge for a little bit. It's not going to be announced, right? People keep saying, when's the announcement on Harry's security? It's not going to be like formally announced. Security is always one of those things that they say, we can't talk about it. What could happen is that either side could leak it. So Harry's side could leak it, or the Home Office could leak it. Either of those things could happen. So that's kind of, people have been asking me what's going on with Harry's security. We've also got the court case, Harry's court case going on. So we had Elton John and David Furnish giving evidence, Thursday and Friday. That's kind of the end of the claimants' witness statements and cross-examinations. So we're going to move on next week to hopefully some of the private investigators, and we are going to move on potentially to some of the journalists. Of course, Rebecca English from the Daily Mail really in the frame here. Harry's team alleging that she published unlawfully gathered information about Chelsea's Davies' flight plans from South Africa, and there was even an email from a private investigator suggesting that they put somebody in the empty seat next to her to presumably to extract information from her on the way home. A plot which Harry rightly, I think, described as creepy. So that is all going on next week. I'll be covering that if there's anything to cover. We had David Furnish this week. I thought David Furnish was amazing, just incredible details into their life, the fact that Elton doesn't have a mobile phone, and of course this incredible detail of Karl Lagerfeld refusing to come to their wedding because he was told that he couldn't bring a camera, and this was being offered up as evidence of just how seriously they take their security, that they'd rather forego the presence of the Kaiser than allow anybody to bring a camera to their wedding. So we shall see what the week ahead brings. There'll probably be some revelations in the Sunday papers tomorrow. My sense is that journalists are getting to the end of what they can really find in the Epstein files. I think their attention is going to turn on this week, obviously, to William and Catherine going to Saudi Arabia, a absolutely ridiculous and completely unfair decision by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. I would say, interestingly, a sort of known fan of Harry, although I don't believe she's trying to undermine William and Catherine by sending them to Saudi Arabia. I genuinely don't believe that. But interesting that she is the Foreign Secretary now, of course, of the United Kingdom. And so ultimately it is down to her that William and Catherine are going to Saudi Arabia, although I'm told that the plan has been there for a long time and is not, a personal insistence. But it's a strange situation, a Labour government sending the British royal family to a murderous regime that, just a few years ago, chopped up a journalist, the Jamal Khashoggi, chopped up a journalist and body never found. More journalists have been killed by Saudi Arabia this year. And indeed, just generally in terms of executions, I think 345 executions last year, the highest in the world, with some people being executed for crimes that they committed when they were children. So not quite sure what William and Catherine are doing going there. I'm a realist. I understand that we need to have our defence arrangements with perhaps unsavoury countries that, we might do things differently to how we do them. I understand we need to have trade arrangements. They control vast amounts of the world's oil that we put in all our cars and use for all our products. So I'm not suggesting that we sort of boycott Saudi Arabia or something like that. But I do think it's a little strange that we are honouring them with a state visit by our two most popular members of the royal family. That's just my opinion. We'll see what happens. I think it's also going to be very, very interesting to see whether any journalists dare ask William and Catherine what they think should happen about Andrew. Is the royal rota going? So I'll put it this way, I'm not holding my breath, but hopefully somebody, spending that amount of time with journalists, hopefully somebody will be able to find out what on earth they actually think should be done with Andrew, whether he should face accountability and a police investigation. So it'd be interesting to see, A, if they asked the question, and B, if they are asked the question, whether and how they answer it. So that's on Tuesday. They're off on Tuesday. All the action, all the photos are going to be from the desert. I'm sure there'll be amazing photographs, and it's going to be very interesting. And we will find out whether and how well Catherine speaks Arabic. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye.